untenable. Ukraine's also calling for an urgent ceasefire to restore power to the Chernobyl plant because of fears of a potential radioactive leak. Sky's Ashish Joshi reports.
They're looking for survivors or the injured. Anyone who might still be alive under the debris. This building, like so many in Sumy, in northeastern Ukraine, reduced to splinters and rubble. This video was shot by Ukrainian emergency services, first responders in a war zone when so many need help.
Russia dropped here bombs, and you can see that the whole area is totally destroyed.
This is what happens after relentless Russian bombardment. Neighborhoods like this one in Kharkiv turned into ghost towns, devoid of all life and no knowing when it will return. The Russian invasion has entered its 14th day. The plea for Western intervention still as strong today as it was 2 weeks ago.
14 днів.
From the first day of the Russian invasion, Ukraine keeps telling our partners that if you don't close the airspace over Ukraine, you will be responsible for Ukrainian people's death too. Russia uses missiles and bombs to kill our people, to target our infrastructure. This is a responsibility, a moral duty of the world to help us. Look, we've got a war. We don't have time for all these mediation and discussions. It's not a ping-pong game. We are talking about people's lives. Make this decision quickly. Please send us fighter jets.
Russia is keen to show the world the might of its military muscle. Moscow, no doubt stung by Western analysis, suggesting its advance is behind schedule. Its defense ministry has shared footage of armored columns and attack helicopters it claims are in action in Ukraine. And it also wants to show the world that it is responding to the humanitarian crisis that it has itself created. Moscow shared these pictures of aid being distributed among residents of a village outside Kharkiv. But as it continues its offensive on the ground, Moscow has also stepped up its diplomatic attack on Ukraine, accusing it of using biological weapons.
We confirmed that during the special military operation, we uncovered certain facts. We uncovered this urgent cover-up of vestiges of programs that were being run in laboratories. We can't be talking about the use of these laboratories for peaceful purposes. These labs were financed by the US Ministry of Defense. We can conclude that in Ukrainian laboratories close to our borders, components of biological weapons were being developed. The urgent destruction of these materials was ordered in order not to disclose the materials and the programs that were being developed there.
Over 2 million people have now fled this conflict, and Ukrainians continue to pour over her borders seeking safety. Desperate families torn from loved ones, some who remain behind facing an increasingly uncertain future. Ukraine's capital has yet to fall, but fighting inches ever closer. This surreal show of defiance, the Kiev Classic Symphony Orchestra, performing in the city's Maidan Square for the residents who were still here. They played the EU's adopted anthem, Ode to Joy. But there is little of that here. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, let's take you live now to Lviv in Western Ukraine and our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah, first of all, let's take a look at what Defence Secretary Ben Wallace just had to say in his briefing at the House of Commons, talking about the UK considering sending air defence and anti-tank missiles to Ukraine.
Yes, he was updating the House on the UK's contribution to support the Ukrainian armed forces. The UK was the first European nation to send in these defensive weapons, as he describes them. And he said that in terms of the number of anti-tank weapons that have been sent in already, it's more than 3,600 now, which is up from 2,000 at the beginning of the war nearly 2 weeks ago. And he also said that they were going to start sending in another form of anti-tank missile, the Javelin, and he said that they were considering sending in anti-air missiles as well. Now, this is the thing that the Ukrainians have been crying out for. They've been very appreciative of the anti-tank weapons, it must be said. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainian military have been able to take out so many Russian tanks and other armoured vehicles. But clearly they're concerned about the ability of Russia to fly still in their skies, drop bombs on residential areas, they say, or bombs on their cities, also launching missiles against them. And that's something that an anti-aircraft system could help. I mean, the one that the UK is talking about isn't the sort of much larger system that can shoot jets out the skies. It's the sort of system that could take out helicopters, for example. But right now, clearly from the Ukrainian side, anything that can help bolster the abilities of their armed forces are welcome. But I thought it was interesting in the UK Defence Secretary's explanation to MPs of the help that the UK is giving. He says that everything they do, he describes it as defensive weapons. He also says that it's carefully calibrated to make sure that they are supplying these defensive weapons not to a level that would then maybe trigger more of a kind of a strategic help from the UK, which then Russia could perhaps view as the UK becoming directly involved in military confrontation here in Ukraine. That's something that NATO allies all seem to be very carefully trying to avoid, but it's not a black and white situation, is it? It's very grey. And so when does a level of military support from a nation to another nation at war cross that line into being kind of seen by the other side as direct military intervention? At the moment, we're not there, but clearly the Defence Secretary very alive to that issue.
Yeah, the language picked clearly very, very careful there, wasn't it? Defensive weapons used. Deborah, also want to bring up with you the fact that while PMQs was on air and we were listening to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Ukrainian authorities said that power had been knocked out at Chernobyl nuclear plant amid the Russian invasion, and the emergency generators had to be turned on.
Yes, well, it's one of the areas that have caused real international concern is any activities around these nuclear plants. Obviously, the one in Chernobyl is, it's not operational in any sense that it was before, but clearly that was the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, outside of a war, in terms of what happened in the 1980s in Chernobyl. And then there's been concerns too, hasn't there, about the other nuclear plant that the largest one in Europe that's in the centre of Ukraine, that too came under Russian fire during the war, and Russian military personnel are on that site too, and there are Ukrainians still operating both of those sites, but clearly it's no longer under Ukrainian control, and the International Atomic Energy Agency has been really sounding the alarm about this and has been saying, you'll remember, that they've been offering, the head of the IAEA has even offered to come to Chernobyl to speak to the two parties and try to agree some sort of framework to ensure the safety of these plants. I mean, any disaster, any nuclear disaster in any of Ukraine's nuclear power plants wouldn't just be a catastrophe for Ukraine, but could potentially be a catastrophe for a much wider area in Europe. So it's clearly a problem that's every now and again, like we're hearing today, being illuminated when the actual circumstances at the particular site changes.
Deborah Haynes, Security and Defence Editor, live from Lviv. Thanks very much indeed. Right, well, let's take a closer look then at the situation on the ground in Ukraine for you. Thomas Moore is here with me in the studio, as well as Air Marshal Edward Stringer. Thomas.
It is 2 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, and I am joined by Air Marshal Edward Stringer, former Director of Operations at the Ministry of Defence. Ed, this is not the picture that President Putin would hope to see at this stage.
No, and you can see it's not really changed that much significantly in the last week. It's important to say that for Russia to take Ukraine, it's not as simplistic as stationing a soldier on every square yard of the country, so you wouldn't see the map go red. But we can also see that their plan now is revealed, and it was a 2 or 3 day operation to seize the major seats of national government, replace the government with a puppet regime, turn Ukraine into a client state, and assume that 44 million Ukrainians would go along with that.
Let's take a look at what's happening in the north of Ukraine then. And we can see there that they are still hoping to keep open those humanitarian corridors out of Sumy and also from the towns west of Kiev. But it is the military situation around the capital that you want to talk about.
Yes, well, one of the bits that has changed over the last week is this apparent thrust here, almost pure east to west towards Kiev. And that's in contrast to where the initial north to south line was. And we've been covering over the last 2 weeks that convoy that has got stalled. And increasingly, it looks like the Russians have created their own 40-mile roadblock. And this may well be that they have to open another line of communication here. This is yet another logistic challenge. And it seems to be they're trying to double down and come up with a plan B when they didn't have one. And it looks like increasingly it's pressure on Kiev to try and reach some form of acceptable solution.
And the Ukrainian government has been looking for more air power, and there's been an interesting development overnight. The suggestion, if we look at the wider picture now, a suggestion from Poland that they give up their MiG-29 Soviet-era fighter jets and give them to NATO, probably to the Ramstein air base in Germany. NATO then hand them on to Ukraine. But the Americans have said that is not a situation they would get involved in. Why?
As I understand the plan before the Americans turned it off, is that the Poles would fly the aircraft to Germany, where they would be essentially rebadged as Ukrainian. It doesn't then really matter who flies them from Ukraine into Ukraine. Let's assume it is Ukrainian pilots. You have warplanes getting airborne from a NATO, a German and a US base, about the biggest there is, flying directly into a war zone and therefore into combat. That's getting very close to NATO getting directly involved in this confrontation.
So perception of American fingerprints on those fighter jets, and that's not a situation that NATO would want. Air Marshal, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, here Boris Johnson says he expects the number of visas issued to Ukrainian refugees to rise to the hundreds of thousands. So far, 957 UK visas have been granted and 22,000 applications have been made.
We've already got 1,000 people in under the existing scheme. That number will climb very sharply, Mr. Speaker. No one has been turned away, Mr. Speaker. That is simply, we want to be as generous and, Mr. Speaker, it is important to have checks. Let me make this point to the House, because I think people need to understand. There are some people, Mr. Speaker, who would like to dispense with checks altogether and simply to wave people through. And I've got to say, and I hear the voices on the benches opposite. I do think that is irresponsible, and that is not the approach that we should be taking. The Schengen countries have a different arrangement. We must be in no doubt, as I said in answer to a previous question, the Kremlin has singled out this country for the approach that we are taking. Vladimir Putin, and we know how unscrupulous Putin can be in his methods. It would not be right, Mr. Speaker, to expose this country to unnecessary security risk, and we will not do it, Mr. Speaker. We are going to be as generous as we can possibly be, but we must have checks.
Right, well, meanwhile, UN Refugee Agency says nearly 2.2 million people have now fled Ukraine. Let's break that down for you then. Of those, nearly 1.3 million have crossed into Poland. More than 200,000 have gone to Hungary, which has changed its earlier hardline policy on accepting refugees. More than 150,000 have crossed into Slovakia. More than 85,000 Ukrainian residents are now in Romania, and there is a similar number in Moldova too. It's important to note that huge numbers have already passed through after arriving in these countries. More than 230,000 are now in other European countries, and nearly 100,000 people are reported to have left for Russia. Well, I'm joined now by Sky's Laura Bundock in Calais. Laura, tell us about the scene there and, of course, extraordinary reports that we have been covering of people arriving in Calais only to be turned away.
Yeah, well, this is the situation right now. So this is the youth hostel behind me where there are lots of Ukrainians, and they've been arriving steadily here over the past few days. We're expecting a bus to turn up at some point. It's already late, and it is said to be taking some Ukrainians to a visa application centre. But we don't know who it's taking, and we don't even know which centre it's meant to be going to. It could be Paris, it could be Brussels, or it could be this new temporary pop-up centre in Lille. We just don't know. And I think that paints the picture of the amount of confusion, the complex situation that is facing the Ukrainians as they arrive here. Now, I met Mohammed. He's travelled from Kyiv with his wife, her daughter, and some friends. They have been catching trains for days. They went through Slovakia, Austria, Germany, France, ending up here in Calais. He thought he'd be on a ferry by now to the UK, where he has family, and they are going to welcome him in, they said. But he realises he needs this visa. He has on spec gone to Paris this lunchtime to try and get an appointment there. That's not what the Home Office says he should do. They say you need to book the appointment and then go to it. But he was very surprised and frustrated by the difficulty he faces going to the UK when he has family there, he said. He said it is a complex, a difficult way of getting in. We also met the Bolotina family. Now, they drove here in their car, taking with them their dog and their 3 guinea pigs, everything they can carry. They've also left Kyiv. They've got their appointment booked in Paris tomorrow, but they know it could be a long wait before they get the decision. And I met this young couple, Anatoly and Natalia, and they too drove across from the Polish border, taking their most precious possession, a scan of their unborn baby. Natalia is 14 weeks pregnant. She had this scan the day before she decided she had to leave Ukraine. Now, they've been told it's a 5-day wait to find out if their visa will be approved. They are just sat inside. She is pregnant. They are waiting. They simply do not know. They do not know. The baby's due in September. They don't know where they will be living then, and they just don't know where their baby will be born. It is a pretty bleak picture here in Calais today.
For us to give us an idea of what people are going through. Thanks very much indeed. Well, while the UK's refugee scheme has been criticised for its slow start, Ireland says it's now taken more than 2,500 refugees from Ukraine. Live then to Dublin Airport and our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy. Stephen, Ireland comparatively doing all it can to help refugees coming from Ukraine, with a woeful response from the UK.
Well, a really steady stream of Ukrainian arrivals here in Dublin Airport. We're in the arrivals hall of Terminal 1 here at the moment, and a really steady stream. I was just talking to a gentleman from County Carlow who said he was moved to come down by the coverage he saw on Sky News to volunteer his spare rooms in his house. He's now collecting 2 Ukrainian families from a flight from Dusseldorf. Never met them before in his life. He's going to drive them down an hour and a half south and host them for as long as needs be. Around 400 or so per day are arriving here at Dublin Airport. The true figure may be higher. The Irish government only has statistics for Dublin Airport, not the other ports of entry. We just saw the Justice Minister down here as well. A desk has been set up where the new arrivals are given leaflets outlining the social protections. They're entitled to work. Their children are entitled to access education. Housing will be provided. We appreciate this may be a very difficult time for you and your family, is how this information starts off. It's available obviously in Ukrainian and Russian as well. Not everybody, though, appears to be quite so enthused about Ireland's open door policy. Reports in the last 24 hours or so that there are those within the British government have certain security concerns, given that Ireland, with its open door policy to Ukrainians here, has obviously an open border with the United Kingdom, about an hour and a half north from here in the UK. So I put that and those concerns to the Irish Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, about an hour ago, and this is what she had to say in reply.
I think the conversations that I have with Priti Patel are the most important, not perhaps reports that I read on a newspaper. I'm very confident and happy with the conversations that we've had.
But you don't understand the concerns expressed?
I think we all have to be vigilant. I think we all need to make sure that anybody coming into our country, be it Ireland or any other country, any other member state or beyond, that we take the appropriate measures and checks to make sure that people are who they say they are. And that, of course, is happening in this instance, where information can be shared and provided to the UK and the Home Office. That is being done.
The Minister was also extremely clear that the common travel area arrangement, that's free movement between Britain and Ireland, would be in no way impacted by the current crisis. So for the moment, here at Dublin Airport, as I said, the steady stream, we're expecting between 400 and 500 more Ukrainian citizens to arrive here, continues, and they are being given temporary protection measures. They can stay here for a maximum of up to 3 years. And as I was just saying, there are ordinary Irish people here, as well as Ukrainian relatives, opening their homes to these new arrivals.
Stephen, thanks very much indeed. Good to see a positive response out of all of this destruction. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we speak to the World Nuclear Association amid concern about the ongoing situation at Chernobyl.
Sheet of flame, and it's moving this way.
And over there is Dover.
We track the changes happening to our world right now.
I think it's a procession of the Taliban. There they are, right here.
Would you, as Prime Minister, be able to look them in the face?
Let's have a look at both of those two things.
I just want to say thank you for having the courage to speak to us.
We do genuinely believe in what we do, to show the truth.
I thought there was an astonishing story there.
Welcome back. Well, the war in Ukraine is having a global economic impact. Fuel prices at UK forecourts have hit another record high. And according to data firm Experian Catalyst, the average cost of a litre of petrol was 158.20 yesterday, while diesel reached 165.20. Our business presenter Ian King joins me now from the city. Ian.
Thanks, Sumy. Well, a host of big European companies have today been joining in with the sanctions against Russia and have announced today that they're suspending or shutting their operations in Russia. The French cosmetics giant L'Oreal announced that it's closing its stores in Russia and it's suspending investments in the country. And it also said it would be donating €5 million to charities and organisations supporting humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Heineken, the world's second biggest brewer, said it was stopping the production, advertising and sale of its brand in Russia. It also attacked the Russian government for launching what it called an unprovoked and completely unjustified attack on Ukraine. Well, that news follows last night's announcements from McDonald's, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola and Yum Brands, the owner of KFC and Pizza Hut, that they were suspending operations in Russia. Meanwhile, Unilever, the company behind Dove and Lifebuoy soap, Magnum and Ben & Jerry's ice cream and Domestos disinfectant, has suspended all imports and exports of its products into and out of Russia, and it's to stop all media and advertising spending in the country. Alan Jope, Unilever's chief executive, said the company would not invest any further capital into the country and would not be profiting from its presence in Russia. However, while condemning the war in Ukraine as a brutal and senseless act by the Russian state, the company said that it would, for now, continue to supply everyday essential food and hygiene products made in Russia to the people of the country. Meanwhile, another German car maker has been forced to suspend production due to a shortage of parts from Ukraine. Porsche said it was suspending production of its electric Taycan model in Stuttgart due to a shortage of wire harnesses. That's equipment which bundles together up to 3 miles worth of electric cabling in the typical car. Well, these were previously supplied by the Ukrainian company Leoni. It follows a similar move last week from Volkswagen, which has had to suspend production at 2 of its German plants, putting 8,000 workers on furlough. A third German car maker, BMW, has also warned of interruptions to production. Well, all eyes continue to be on the oil price following last night's news that the US and UK are to stop importing Russian crude and crude products. Here's the current price of Brent crude, currently trading at $124.33 a barrel. That is down by just shy of 3% on the day. Meanwhile, the price of natural gas has eased after it, of course, hit £8 a therm on Monday. Having closed last night at 511p a therm, it was trading at £4.07 a short while ago. On the equity market, following a fall on Wall Street last night, there were more overnight declines in the Asia-Pacific region. The Nikkei 225 in Tokyo fell for the 4th straight session to hit a 16-month low, while there were also declines in Hong Kong and in Shanghai. But markets in Europe have bounced this morning, staged a solid rally. Here's the current picture. As you can see, all of the main European indices up by, in some cases, 5% or more. The MIB in Milan up by 5.25%. The DAX in Germany up by just north of 5%. Sentiment appears to have been lifted by reports that the EU may issue bonds to finance spending on energy and defence. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is also in positive territory, currently up 1.75% in what looks to be a broad-based rally. The leading blue-chip gainer in percentage terms right now is Electro Components. That is a parts distributor, and that is on the back of a trading update. The share's currently nearly 9% to the good. The fund manager M&G, which had results out earlier this week, its shares are also ahead by more than 8%. Outside the FTSE 100, the bus and coach operator Stagecoach, its shares currently up some 36.25%. That is on news of a takeover, valuing it at £595 million. On the foreign exchange markets, meanwhile, well, sterling had been drifting earlier on against the US dollar. The dollar very much in demand since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Sterling currently, though, up by 1/3% against the greenback. It's off by 1/2% right now against the euro. We have a rates decision from the European Central Bank tomorrow. Well, joining me now is the chief market analyst at markets.com, Neil Wilson. Neil, welcome to you. What's behind this rally, do you think? I mean, it's a pretty spectacular move upwards for European equities today.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think you're right pointing out that sort of news about the EU maybe issuing joint bonds. You know, anything that sort of nudges the European Union towards a more fiscal union is sort of lapped up by the market. We've also got expectation for the ECB tomorrow. I think potentially some in the market thinking they might be doing something big, but also you have to look at this as a bit of a dead cat bounce. I feel the technicals may be looking a bit oversold, compelling valuations because prices have come down so much, but you've still got the spectre of stagflation, of much slower growth in Europe, and also we're going to see guidance being cut quite significantly. A lot of the big European corporates, as they have to change their production and deal with far higher input costs from soaring inflation. So I think this is probably a bit of a bear market rally, and one that will be reversed in due course.
Neil, we obviously heard yesterday that the UK is joining the US in trying to wean itself off Russian oil and gas. By the end of the year, there'll be a ban on Russian crude imports here to the UK by the end of this year. Now, Grant Shapps has said this morning that the only way out of this, to make up this shortfall, is going to be increasing North Sea oil production. How feasible do you think that is?
Well, I think in the short term, obviously not very. The problem with the oil markets and gas markets right now is the immediate delivery, and that's just simply not there. We can't make that up very quickly. I think longer term, you could see incentivization for more oil and gas in the North Sea. I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. Even if you're looking at going to 100% zero carbon, you need to bridge. You need to get there. Now we were going to bridge that gap with imports of Russian oil. About 10% of our oil in 2019, I think, came from Russia. So we need to find a bridge. We obviously need to work. We want that Russian oil, and we also need to contend with the fact that Russia might retaliate with further sanctions on the West. The threats in recent days to pull the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, that needs to be looked at as well. But I think the North Sea can deliver some incremental oil and gas to the UK, but it will take time. It takes about 3 years for a new project to start flowing. So it's not a solution for the immediate term. I think at the moment we'll be looking for securing LNG shipments and hoping and praying that the wind keeps blowing in order to power the wind turbines.
All right, Neil, got to leave it there. Neil Wilson from markets.com there. Good to see you, Neil. Thank you. Sumy, back to you.
Ian, thanks very much indeed. Ukraine's government has called for an immediate ceasefire around the Chernobyl nuclear plant to allow repairs to the site's power supply. The state-owned nuclear company had warned that radioactive substances could be released into the atmosphere if power isn't restored soon. Well, let's bring in Jonathan Cobb from the World Nuclear Association. He joins me live now. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on what is an incredibly worrying update coming from Chernobyl. Just how worried should we be?
I think one of the things we can bear in mind is that the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General, Rafael Grossi, has just put out a statement. He has been informed by the Ukrainian authorities of developments at Chernobyl, and he said there is no critical impact on safety at the moment. Now, reasons for that include the fact that on site at Chernobyl, like at the active reactors that there are in the Ukraine, there are diesel generators, and these start up very soon after any power supply loss from the grid to start supplying power to the site. The second reason is the reactors at Chernobyl haven't been operating. The last one closed in 2000. And so the fuel that was discharged from those reactors has been cooling over those 21 years. And it is now very much cooler than it would have been when it was discharged from the plant. So that, in fact, on the 3rd of March, the IAEA released a statement saying that in the event of power being lost, the water itself in the spent fuels, where the fuel that was discharged from the reactors while they were operating, where that fuel's being kept, the water alone would be sufficient to keep that fuel cooled.
OK, well, that's good news, at least. And how long do we expect the diesel generators to last? Do you have an idea of a time frame of how long they can keep things going?
Well, the thing that probably would be one limiting factor would be the availability of diesel fuel. So in reactors, there tends to be a few days, maybe up to 7 days of fuel supply available for those diesel generators. And so that would need to be replenished if they were required to operate further than that.
Yeah, exactly. And with so many of Ukraine's major cities on lockdown, we've seen the catastrophic situation in Mariupol as well. That diesel getting into Chernobyl is clearly very important. Rafael Grossi had also offered to visit Chernobyl or Zaporizhzhia, hadn't he, because of his concerns about keeping these nuclear plants going. Just how concerned should we be about the fact that this has happened now and the potential for perhaps the diesel won't get there in time? Or do you think that there are negotiations that must be being conducted as we speak to get the diesel there in time?
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind is that it was, in fact, in the first days of the conflict that Russian forces entered the site at Chernobyl. So there are Russian forces who are controlling the Chernobyl site at the moment, and it is the Ukrainian operators who would have been there normally and the international operators who would be assisting them who are carrying out the day-to-day operations, but it is being controlled by the Russians. So this isn't a situation where the site is within an area of high conflict. So that is something to bear in mind, that the Russians are actually operating the site. So they have been allowing the operators to carry on their activities. There are concerns over the way in which the operators are being treated. For example, the operators haven't been allowed to leave. So although they have organized into shifts, the same operators who were on the site when the site was taken over by the Russian forces are still working there. And that's obviously a stressful situation to be in. And that's one issue I know that Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, is wanting to resolve.
Yeah, of course, because presumably if people are working long hours and are getting tired, then you don't want anyone to not have their eye on the ball at a nuclear plant in particular.
No, I mean, they are very professional people who are at that site. They have organized into shift systems, so they have the potential to get the rest that they would need. But clearly it is not as good as it could be, and it is not the same as is happening at the Zaporizhzhia site, which is the operating nuclear plant that has also been occupied by Russian forces. There they are allowing workforces to exchange their shifts in a more usual fashion.
Right, OK. Well, I also want to ask you about if you have any information about the radiation levels coming from Chernobyl. Are they still normal? Is there nothing to worry about as far as that's concerned?
I have no direct information on that. There were concerns raised by the IAEA that some of the automatic readings that they would normally expect to receive weren't being delivered, but I don't think there's any indication that there is an issue at present, because I refer to that statement from Rafael Grossi that there is no critical impact on safety at the moment.
OK. Jonathan Cobb from the World Nuclear Association, thanks very much indeed. And a reminder that here on Sky News, we're keeping you up to date with all the latest on the situation in Ukraine. Every day we are bringing you special programmes like this one with all the day's developments. The next will be at 7 o'clock this evening. And to let you know that tonight we're also running a special programme looking at President Putin's invasion tactics. That's Putin's war, the battle for Ukraine, this evening at 9:30 p.m. here on Sky News. This is Sky News Today. Coming up, as the war continues to devastate Ukraine, I'll be speaking to the Managing Director of Operations at the World Bank to discuss the financial impact on the country. More now on the financial situation arising from the Russian invasion, and the World Bank has approved an emergency financing package of more than $700 million for Ukraine. Joining me now from Berlin is Axel van Trotzenberg, who is the Managing Director of Operations at the World Bank. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I know typically support loans don't come with restrictions or conditions. Can you tell us a bit about what you expect this money to go towards?
Well, first of all, this was an emergency operation we prepared in less than a week. Normally, these operations take months to prepare. What we have been doing is the Ukrainian government needs desperately budgetary resources to pay pensioners, to pay the salaries of civil servants, to keep the health system going. And there are large needs, and they need these resources. So we put a package together that is joined by a host of countries, including Britain, to help financing. And so we went to the board on Monday, and we are proceeding with disbursements.
So if we can break some of that down, then it is an emergency package. You have moved to act as quickly as possible, clearly. So then countries have been generous and forthcoming, would you say, with putting this package together?
Yeah, okay, exactly. So what we have done, we originally had 350. Then we got guarantees from Sweden and from the Netherlands that allowed us to go to about 500 million. We have about 100 million parallel financing from the Japanese government. And then a trust fund was created where 5 countries will put in about $134 million, including 100 million from the United Kingdom. So this is a package that is needed. This is for us certainly the first in a set of packages we would like to prepare. The government desperately needs international financial support, so we are prepared to provide a total of about $3 billion in the months ahead.
And presumably, as you mentioned briefly there, that's to help the government keep everything moving and ticking along while it kind of redirects a lot of its funds towards the war effort. So this is for pensions, hospital workers and social programs?
That is exactly. Right now it is to keep the government going and to provide maximum support. And clearly, once the war is over and its government needs reconstruction help, we will be there as well.
And what about support for neighbouring countries that are taking in tens of thousands of refugees, a record number for Europe, to more than 2 million now?
Yeah, exactly. That is also, so there's direct support to Ukraine. Then there is the next one.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt you. Let's take you live now to the House of Commons and Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng.
I'm sure all members will join me in thanking him once again for his inspiring words, his great leadership. And it is with those words in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we come, or certainly I come here today. With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the UK phase-out of imports of Russian oil in response to Vladimir Putin's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. The UK joins key allies, including the United States, in halting the import of Russian oil, which makes up 44% of Russian exports and 17% of the government's revenue through taxation. This action follows the most punishing set of sanctions that the British state has ever imposed on a G20 nation. Our trade, financial and personal sanctions are having an effect on the Russian economy. The ruble, as I speak, has now fallen by nearly 42%, and the Moscow exchange's stock trading has been shut since the 25th of February. The British government has sent a clear message to Putin's regime and to those who support him in his war against Ukraine. It is important to remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Russia produces only a fraction of the fuel products currently imported to the UK. In a competitive global market for oil and petroleum products, demand can be met by alternative sources of supply. And as a result of international revulsion at Putin's invasion, Russian oil is already being excluded from much of the market, and currently it is trading at quite a sharp discount from other crude oil sources. But we want to go further, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday I set out that the UK is phasing out imports of Russian oil during the course of the year. This transition will give the market, it will give businesses and supply chains more than enough time to substitute Russian imports. Businesses should use this year to ensure as smooth a transition as possible so that consumers will not be affected. The government will work with companies through a new task force on oil to support them to make use of this period in finding alternative supplies. Yesterday, I spoke with businesses, unions and representatives from the sector, and of course, I and officials in BEIS will continue to engage and support British business. While Russian imports account for 8% of total UK oil demand, the UK is also, one should remember, a significant producer of both crude oil and petroleum products. We participate in a global market for these products, and we have resources in place in the unlikely event of supply disruption. Over the course of the year, the task force we set up will work closely with international partners, including the USA, the Netherlands, and the Gulf, to ensure alternative supplies of fuel products. Last week, I addressed the International Energy Agency, and tomorrow we will have an extraordinary meeting of the G7 energy ministers to discuss further steps. While businesses should do everything they can to source oil from alternative sources, they will still be able, it's important to emphasize this, they will still be able to import Russian oil during this transition period. These measures target oil-related products imports only. The UK is not dependent on Russian natural gas, making up less than 4% of our supply. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will be exploring options to end this altogether. I want to make clear to the House that we fully intend and we must end our dependency on all Russian hydrocarbons. In the meantime, we need more investment in North Sea oil and gas production as we make the move to cheaper and cleaner power. Turning off domestic production, as some are calling for at this moment, would be completely the wrong thing to do. We're not going to do it. The Prime Minister has also confirmed that the government will set out an energy strategy to explain the UK's long-term plans for greater energy security, including both renewable and nuclear power, building on our 10-point plan. This measure and those being taken by our allies in terms of the phase-out, the oil phase-out, will move the West away from a dependency on Russian oil. It will take us on a road to building a stronger, more resilient British energy system. It will also increase the growing pressure on Russia's economy and will ultimately hamper Russia's ability to impose further misery on the Ukrainian people.
Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Secretary of State for his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are united against Russian aggression. We stand together in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. And let me echo the admiration he expressed for President Zelenskyy and his address to us yesterday. His bravery and eloquence was both extraordinary and inspiring. On the Secretary of State's immediate decisions, we know that Putin's war machine is being funded by oil and gas. That's why it's right for every country to do what it can to isolate the regime and every company to do so. So we fully support the government's decision to ban oil imports. It is a right and welcome step. And it is right also to work with the companies and unions on how we implement this policy. I'd like to ask the Secretary of State in his reply, maybe he could tell us what assessment he has made of the impact of the ban on petrol and diesel prices. We also support him in his decision to seek to find ways to rid ourselves of Russian gas imports. And I want to ask him about the wider energy security context to his statement, which he talked about. But I think it's essential that we learn the right lessons from this crisis. Although 50% of our gas comes from the North Sea and only 4% from Russia, we pay the same price for our own gas as that which we import because we operate in an integrated gas market. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are absolutely exposed to the rocketing wholesale gas prices that we are seeing, currently up 100% on the month and 800% on the year. The right lesson to learn is therefore surely that we have to go much further and much faster in developing homegrown zero-carbon power, including renewables and nuclear, which can free us from the whims of autocrats and dictators who can use fossil fuels as a geopolitical weapon. Does the Secretary of State agree this is the right lesson and that policy will need to change? In particular, does he agree we should finally end the effective moratorium on onshore wind in the planning regulations, which has denied us power each and every year since 2015, equivalent to our gas imports from Russia? Does he agree we should ramp up our offshore wind so we go well beyond 40 gigawatts? And does he agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's time to finally get serious about energy efficiency, the best way of cutting energy demand, and where the government has not succeeded in the past years? On the North Sea, Madam Deputy Speaker, there needs to be a phased transition, but will he now clarify the government's position on fracking? And will he confirm that the moratorium that was put in place will remain in place? No ifs, no buts. No ifs, no buts, as fracking would not make any difference to the prices consumers pay, is dangerous and would take decades to come on stream. They don't agree with me. I've got a position against fracking. They support fracking. We'd love to know what the Secretary of State and the government thinks, and I'm sure they would too. Finally, let me ask him about the cost of living crisis facing families arising from what is happening to oil and gas prices. We have consistently warned the government that their measures were wholly inadequate for the rise in energy bills. I asked the Secretary of State today, will he undertake to tell the Chancellor that in his spring statement he must come back with much, much more help for both families and businesses? Let me end by saying this, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are united in our support for people in Ukraine. We will support the government in everything it does, which can cut off support for the evil and barbaric Putin regime. And we urge the government to learn the right lessons from this crisis for our country so we can achieve both energy security and energy sovereignty.
State.
Deputy Speaker, in his customary way, he raised a large number of questions, the majority of which I hope to deal with. In terms of his words against Putin's barbaric invasion, his completely illegal actions, I'm very pleased that he's reflecting our sentiments, and we have a mutual interest in making sure that Putin fails. As far as the cost of living is concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was an extensive intervention by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I think it's quite wrong for opposition politicians to say that the price cap, which will be set in August, is going to necessarily be higher than what it is today. We simply don't know. He will understand that the price cap will be set at a time retrospectively looking at the average price. It may well be higher, but there are circumstances in which it won't be increasing as much as he imagines. And of course, as is always the case, we have an ongoing look at the price cap. We speak to Ofgem all the time, and Ofgem is engaging work in terms of how the price cap is calculated. In terms of the North Sea, I'm pleased to hear that he's very keen to support investment in the North Sea in terms of making sure that gas is a key transition fuel. That's something which I think many people on the benches opposite may disagree with. And of course, he's absolutely right to stress an increased focus on renewables and nuclear power. We are absolutely at one in our agreement on this.
Robert Jenrick.
And Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business and Energy Minister, speaking there, announcing that there's going to be a meeting of G7 ministers in response to this energy crisis tomorrow. He was giving further details there of the announcement he made yesterday online about the UK government's strategy to wean the UK off Russian oil and oil products. He said it's going to be phased out by 2022, saying it gives businesses and industries plenty of time to find alternative supplies stabilise, and the government will be helping them with that. So that's Kwasi Kwarteng speaking there in the House of Commons. More on that a little later on. Now, Ukraine's president has been warning of a humanitarian catastrophe if the West doesn't do more to help his country. Volodymyr Zelenskyy was speaking after a Polish plan to provide Ukraine with fighter jets was rejected by the United States. In the past hour, Ukraine issued a warning about the Chernobyl nuclear plant because of a power cut. However, the international watchdog says there is no critical impact on safety. Well, let's take a look at the latest developments on Wednesday so far across Ukraine. The capital, Kiev, woke up again to the sound of air raid sirens, and later the sound of explosions echoed around the city. Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Mariupol are all surrounded by Russian forces and continue to experience heavy shelling. Ashish Joshi, our correspondent, has an update on the story so far today.
They're looking for survivors or the injured. Anyone who might still be alive under the debris. This building, like so many in Sumy,